Maxine,
Simon.
welcome to the Museum of Witchcraft and Magic.
It's a delight to be here.
Thank you very much. We're very, very honoured. And it's been a fantastic weekend. And I've got a little list of questions for you. But first of all, I wanted to mention something that Cecil used to talk about in the way in which he described the museum as a web to gather in knowledge. And I find that we're the latest flies in that web today, because I hope during the course of this interview we'll be sharing knowledge, which is the main thing, which was Cecil's aim for setting up the museum.
What was the fly?
We are.
Oh, I see.
Yes,
Oh.
we are. Latest ones. But seeing as there's quite a few magical objects that belong to Alex that you would have had an association with, I wondered whether you could tell us about this piece. It's a mask that we have on display in the museum, and I wondered if you had any stories associated with it.
It was made for Alex. We were filming and working with Black Widow, and he had to take the part of the magician, and I was the demon. But it was more fierce when it was simple. He obviously added this on later, and the feathers were rather gorgeous. The picture of it is on the first edition of What Witches Do.
Right.
And
oh yes.
Yes, and I'm in the long robes, and Alex is in this. And this, I can't remember. This was silver, and that was red.
Oh, so it's been repainted.
Yes, Alex did it. Or he got somebody to do it, and I think it's lost its energy. It looks particularly menacing now, but before it was still menacing, but it was cleaner menacing.
Right.
And this, I think it was made for the magician, not for the witch. Yeah.
So it was more of a prop for that.
Yes.
But did you then go on to use it in rituals at all?
I think Alex did. I don't know. He never did when he was in London. He might have done it in Bexhill.
Okay. No, it's particularly. Lots of people comment on it.
He did work with the Aztecs. That was his main interest. He was quite obsessed with it, and very much into masks.
Yeah.
But in the 60s and 70s, whenever he appeared on television, he'd wear very dark glasses.
Right.
And when challenged on it, he would say, "It's to protect you from me."
Oh, fantastic. Yeah.
Well, I didn't think it was fantastic. I thought it was a bit cocky.
It was a bit I'll leave that back. Looking back, just for those who might not know, I think it'd be interesting just to ask how you first met Alex and what your first impressions were of him.
My mother knew him before I was born. They were great friends. They worked in the same place. My mother was a company nurse. And Alex spent more time chatting to my mother than he did on the floor, so to speak. And they were great friends. But after I was born, he used to babysit. And my father hated this man and called him something pansy.
Right.
And so they separated, their ways went separate. And then my mother was involved with Gurdjieff and Subud, and she was making inquiries about Subud and had to meet in the Seven Circles Cafe in Manchester, and there was Alex.
Oh, okay.
And that was what brought him back in. And when she told me that she'd invited Alex to tea and that he was a witch, I was furious. I phoned the church, Father George, and he said, "Well, what can you do with a Catholic that reads the news of the world and then invites witches for tea? There's no stopping them, they will have their way." And he was quite right.
Yeah.
And so Alex became a regular visitor. And no, I didn't like him when I first saw him. I thought he looked bald and bandy, and later I discovered that he indeed was toothless.
Right.
So,
oh, really?
Mm.
Oh, okay.
He had them all out when he was 26 because he broke the front one. And he was so vain, he said, "Take them all out."
The whole shebang. Gosh.
He was quite open about it. He told everybody. He was aware of his vanity. He was both a humble man, generous to a fault, and he was the ruthless magician. So, and I was once asked, what was he? Was he a magician, truly? And what was he? And I said, well, he is, or was, the magician and the fool.
Mm. Yeah. The two are closely linked in lots of parables.
Yes. But I mean this, without the parables, it was a fact.
So, during the 60s and 70s, Alex never held back from sort of courting publicity. And
You say that.
well, there's a lot of press. We've got
There
a lot
is
of
a
press.
tremendous amount of press, but he didn't court it
Right,
until
that's
he
interesting.
left London, which was late 72, 73. He was a magnet for the press. The phone never stopped. He didn't approach anybody
Right.
in the media. He loved it, and the moment they phoned, you know, he'd open the front door immediately.
Yeah.
Loved it.
Yeah.
And it was almost destiny that his character was needed to speak with the press.
Yeah. To be
No.
a spokesperson almost.
Well, in retrospect, I don't know whether it was right. I'm veering more and more now to the secrets and the sacredness, and to keep the craft's sacredness. So, but it's done now.
Yeah. Do you think how much of it was to do with his need for sort of recognition, and how much was it to do with ensuring the survival of the craft? Did he see it that way by publicising it?
He was an acute clairvoyant. I think he was a man of the moment, but he did. He enjoyed the publicity. He was clairvoyant enough to know that in the future this sort of thing would be happening. And he also knew that he was the one that opened the door to it.
Yeah.
Whether it was about his own ego, I think, yes, to do that kind of work there had to be.
Yeah.
But
You have to be an extrovert.
I think his, and this is often, or not spoken about, was his absolute love of the craft. I mean, he'd curse it. He'd curse the goddess regularly.
Yeah.
She was a bit like the Italians. If it didn't rain, he'd be drowning the statue. But his love was unquestionable.
I think that comes across from my opinion, anyway, from what I've gathered. Was there a reason why the sort of underground press, the magazines like Oz and Viz, didn't pick up on it in a way? Because I haven't seen any interviews done with Alex within those sort of underground journals that existed.
There were some, what was it, Time Out? No, that wasn't it yet. Well, that was a big thing. That went on for a whole year with Alex writing backwards and forwards, these two magicians. And everybody was, couldn't wait for the next letter.
Right.
So maybe they'd got better things to do, the others. But
Yeah. And how did Man, Myth and Magic come about, the connection?
a phone call, as usual.
Yeah.
A phone call. I forget the names of the people. But he was on the TV when they were just bringing it out.
Oh, okay.
He was part of the original
Yeah.
presentation. Yeah.
So talking about those times too, how did the relationship with Black Widow, the rock band, come about?
Another phone call.
Right.
We got a phone call in the afternoon. Black Widow had a stage act that went with their record, and basically it was the magician in a circle bringing back the goddess that he loved from a previous life,
Right.
unaware that during that time the gods of the old had become the devils of the new. And so what happened, he'd invoked Ashtaroth. And Ashtaroth was in the form of a very beautiful priestess. He was in his circle, and he made the mistake and broke the circle. And so the demon came in, and you see this almighty battle. And it was, and when Alex and I did it at one point, I did it with Black Widow because every girl that they had got in to play the part either had a nervous breakdown or became psychotic or something. So the phone call went, there's something that we need somebody to do this. Alex said, oh, Nikki will do that for you. And Nikki backed out at the last minute. And without any rehearsal, I did it.
You were thrown into the...
Yes, I was very frightened, but once I got the hang of this demonic stuff, I quite enjoyed it. You know,
Right.
it allowed something out. And especially when it came to the point of Alex being the magician and not the band singer. And then we had a battle royal, and they covered me with glue to put the sprinkle on, you know, to give me that.
Oh, glitter, right, yeah.
Alex threw the censer at me. This is on stage, 2 firemen to the side, and he set me on fire. And I could see him thinking, don't you dare come on this, to the firemen. And anyway, it was all right, and I wasn't scarred. The glue was a bit difficult to get off, but we took it quite seriously when we did anything publicly. And Alex, a few people know that when there were photographs taken of so-called rituals, they weren't, they were all posed. Of course they were all posed. We're not going to put our sacred craft truly in front of the cameras. But we know the best angle, etc. And Alex really did. He wouldn't have. There'd been pictures of some witches previously, and he said, "My witches are not going to look like that. You have to be good." Well, he didn't say Alexandrian then, but it was, "These are my witches." And a lot of people, you see them photographed today, and they'll go out working outside, and they've got big boots on.
Thermals.
And the jeans, the robe's not long enough to cover them, and they look like pagans, not witches. You know, witches can be robed or naked. But coming from the robes, the naked is one single thing. It's not taking layer after layer. We want to be at one with the natural elements. We're not hikers.
No.
He would sit up the night before on his treadle sewing machine, making as many as 12, 13 robes.
So he was adept at making the robes too. Oh, well.
And he was a great crocheter.
Crochet. Oh, well.
He once, we'd done a film called Legend of the Witches, and Malcolm Lee invited us to the after party, and I wore this purple crochet dress, and it was a mini, and I was drinking and people kept pouring me the wine, and I was dancing a lot, and I thought, I'm getting a lot of attention here, and my skirt was getting shorter and shorter. One of the threads had caused quite a stir.
Where did it end up?
Oh, no, you shouldn't. No. But I kept my dignity.
Good. You mentioned Alexandrian, actually, the term. How did that come about? Wasn't Stuart Farrer involved?
Well, Stuart Farrer, he, people were calling Alexandrians.
Yeah.
That had happened. But when it came to the book, Stuart wanted to know, there was just a very brief conversation, okay, what title are we going to settle on? Or words to that effect. And then he said, Alexandrian. And Alex and I looked at one another and said, you know, it's already out there. So, but he put the seal on it.
Right. Now I've always wondered about how that came about.
And it wasn't after the library.
Oh, it wasn't, because I've read somewhere that it could have been the Alexandrian.
No, they get confused. These people, they assume these things happened. It was my fault. I named my daughter Maya Alexandria. And while we were in the registry office, Alex said, are you sure you don't want Alexandra? I said, no, I want Alexandria after the library. And it's proven to be a good thing. I have a highly intelligent daughter who is forever with a nose in a book. So, anyway.
Fantastic. You mentioned being skyclad in rituals. I read this story a long time ago about something in Audley Edge where Alex invited a journalist to witness him raising the dead.
Oh, yeah.
Can you tell me about that story?
Scene. I wasn't on the scene, but I know the story.
Yeah.
One of the covens Alex belonged to was a coven in Poynton, just outside of Manchester. And they were sort of middle-class people, and it was a big coven. A lot of them were teachers. They were professionals. And somehow the press had got an angle on this, that in actual fact the local Christians were indeed witches and were planning a big expose. And Alex said, you know, he went to the press, he said, I'll give you a bigger, better story. And so they accepted it. Went to Alderley Edge, got all these his friends who weren't anything to do with the craft, and a dead body that was all bandaged up and mummified.
Where was the dead body from?
I'm coming to the...
Sorry,
you
sorry,
don't spoil my line, honestly. Anyway, it was laid across one of the stones at Alderley Edge. And a lot of mumbo-jumbo went on, and the final bit of the mumbo-jumbo was a Swiss roll recipe spoken backwards.
Right.
At which point the dead body started to move and come to life. You've got to remember this is in the 1960s, and there was a very... Now we'd all go, oh, go on, you know.
Yeah.
But it frightened them away. They ran.
I can imagine.
They ran. I think they did do a small write-up on it,
Right.
but they were too frightened to really go into it. But there you go. It's amazing what a Swiss roll recipe will give you.
Spoken backwards. Because you worked at Alderley Edge quite a lot. Was there a reason for that, or was it just close by, or...?
It's a very, very beautiful place. It has a high altar, natural high altar, and it has, you can walk under it, and it's called the Devil's Cave below. And if you run round it 3 times, you're supposed to get your virginity back.
Worth knowing.
Pardon?
It's worth knowing.
Oh, yes. Yeah. So why was it? It was a magical place. It has a stone circle there. People think it was to do with the witches. It wasn't. It was the people who worked in the caves below who'd set these stones to sit down and have the dinner, you know, and the sandwiches, and they'd light a fire in the middle. So it was a perfect opportunity for us to...
It is a magical place.
Yes, work there. And Alex had always worked there. He'd always, you know, from childhood, it had been one of his places that they would go to. It was a sort of, not a Blackpool, it was a very sophisticated day out in the country.
Right. Thank you. You've witnessed so many changes in the craft over the years. What do you think have been for the better and for the worse, in your opinion?
You know, I can't answer that. I know for a fact there are some wonderful witches. The majority, indeed, are wonderful, and they get on with the work. They're very devout, full of fun. There's no good being all holy and no laughing. And they are really wonderful. And then you get the other ones that are competing to be the best coven, and they want people to come. They're advertising the craft. Witches were never ones to seek converts, but now it's happening. And I always say, well, people make a crowd, they don't make a coven. And I find the simplicity of the rituals, the basic rituals of the craft, have been added to ad nauseum. And when you come to work them, you find, or I find, that it's empty ritual. A lot of empty ritual. I think there's a lot of play acting, planting seeds in a plant pot in a circle as if we don't know how seeds grow into flowers, you know. We recognise the nature of it, but it's here, it's outside, get out with it. So it has got a side to it that I don't like. But in the main, I think it's pretty wonderful. And I think the changes that have come about, the witches are now more able to help the general community because some of them are known and they can be approached without the fear of being judged or charged.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's another thing. There's a lot of money goes on in today's craft. People do charge money, and I think the majority of times this is very wrong. Even though they say the labourer is worthy of his hire, if they're asked to pay anything more than the cost of the candles and the incense and the actual stuff to make it, then I think this is wrong. There's a story there about Madeleine Montalban.
Oh, tell me.
She found another phone call. She found out. She said, "Maxine, we haven't met, even though I did correspond with your husband at one time. But I need some witch magic. Will you come over?" And I said, "Well, I have to bring somebody with me because I didn't know this woman." Anyway, we got there and I leaned on things. She had a thing about Richard III, these wonderful old oil paintings covered with what she called gems of the earth, coloured glass and so on. In the early part of the evening, she suddenly decided we were going to go out for dinner, and she drank copious amounts of wine. I blame her really to make me, she made me an appreciator of wine. So it's all Madeleine's fault. But she was telling me about this lady that had been to visit her called Si. And this lady had visited me as well after she'd been to Madeleine. And I said, "Well, what happened with you and Si?" And Si had gone and said that she was heartbroken, her boyfriend had left, and that she'd do absolutely anything to get him back. And Madeleine said, "OK, you can have him back. That'll cost you £2,000. And Si said, "Oh, I'm not paying that." So Madeleine worked her magic. She made the woman know that she didn't love him that much.
Yeah. If you put a value on it, then it's not.
So sometimes there's a reason.
I was looking online recently when I knew we were going to be talking today, and in 1997 at the PF conference, Doreen Valiente was saying something very interesting, that she disagreed with Gerard's views on people of the same gender working magically, or gay people working within covens. And she felt that was wrong. It was absolutely perfectly fine for people to do that. And I wondered how you felt, and if your attitudes have changed to people of the same gender working together, or whether it matters.
My attitude towards any sexuality I don't care. It's said that you can't work alone. There's always got to be a female in the circle, and there's always got to be a male.
Yeah.
And I think as long as that is held up, I mean, I love working in a circle with a coven full of men, gay or whatever. The energy is there, and I like it. So, and a lot of people take umbrage at, I once said about in the occult world, the disabled would not be admitted.
Oh, I remember that. Yeah.
Not initiated. Well, I've never worked in a coven without at least 3 disabled people being in there. And I have broken the rules. And sometimes it is a real big mistake to initiate somebody fully able-bodied.
Right.
So it's horses for courses. Somebody comes and asks for initiation. It's whether they have the ability, the vocation and the tendency towards the working of the art magical.
Yeah.
It's nothing to do about whether they're disabled or not, or gay.
Yeah. It's their psychological makeup too.
I find gay men actually have, they're more sensitive to their power energies. It's only the occasional heterosexual man, and they do exist, that make brilliant priests.
Right.
Don't shout at me for saying that.
No, not at all. Another thing that Doreen referred to in that same talk, that lecture, was the Law of Threefold Return. She felt that Gerard had made it up, and I wondered whether you held with that belief in karmic law or not.
I've got 2 ways of thinking about this. We always have a cauldron, always have had, and in this cauldron, that's where the money's kept.
Right.
And anybody can take from the cauldron. But there's a rule. If you do, you have to return it threefold. So it teaches them not to be borrowers.
Right.
To be self-sufficient.
Yeah.
I think in a lot of cases, the threefold law of return it's a necessary lesson. I think you can do things with it and use it. As to karmically, well, I don't know. I don't know. If that's the case, I've been very good and very bad in a past life.
Right.
Because I've had some horrible things happen, but in the main, some really good things.
I was wondering how the move to London affected you both. Whether it sort of opened up a whole new range of opportunities of people to meet, or how did that affect you?
The occult of London came to interrogate us. Who were these, or who was this man that is spoiling the Sunday newspapers? And Alex was very humble, very kind, always gave it from his heart. And some people didn't like him, and other people did. But it happened, it was almost, the amount of people, I didn't notice it getting bigger.
Right.
You know, it was a room, our living room was the size of this room, perhaps a little bit bigger, and it would be full. People, youngsters, you know, everybody was going to India for enlightenment, and those that couldn't afford it came to 40 Clanricarde Gardens. And they'd come and they'd stay. They would stay, they would, you know, come with the sleeping bags. I remember one group of people, and they were a perfect coven, because there were 13 of them, all young, all from Bournemouth, and they arrived in a great big white Bentley, and some of them never went back. They stayed. They were right. They were all hippies, peace man, carrying the incense, flowers in the hair, and it was a very different time. So I didn't notice it getting so big, and it just happened naturally. And of course, we were a covenstead, and as such, we were open and we attracted people. Not by saying, oh, you should come and join, but by saying, this is what we do.
There was a hunger for it, wasn't there then?
Oh,
As there still is now, I think.
I think the 70s, when the early 70s, the coven got really big, until about 1980.
Right.
And then it tapered off. And not everybody that works in a coven stays as a working witch. Some of them go on to set their own groups up. Some of them just go on.
Yeah.
And they stop working the craft. In the Alexandrian tradition, we say at their initiation, you're free to come and go as your conscience dictates. So we put no binding on them. We don't hold them. Alex had very strong opinions. When in Manchester people would come and they knew that we scourged. Oh, well, the swingers came, the sadomasochists came, and Alex said, well, you know, you're not using my circle. And so he made silk cords for the scourge. They said, stop.
And we've got a very dear friend in common, talking about the move to London. And when did you first, do you remember your first trip to the Atlantis bookshop, meeting Geraldine? Geraldine Baskin, for people who don't know.
That was when we were in Manchester, and I was very new. And the dream was, Alex loved here, he loved the museum. But the dream was that Watkins, the British Museum, and Atlantis bookshop, it was museum first, Atlantis second, and Watkins if we could get the timing. But the very first time, it was foggy. And when you open the door, this creaky old door to get into Atlantis, there was those bookshelves there, and they were the reduced ones. But the fog crept under the door, and it was a mist, and it was really magical, intense, and it was a magnet. It was a total magnet. But the first time, yes, it was in a 3-wheeled little blue car, and I'm not particularly small, but I had to sit in the back all the way from Manchester. It was awful. But yes, that was the first time. And over the years, I mean, Atlantis bookshop Geraldine Baskin, well, she's like a magnet to those who want to know as well. People make their way there before they go to any other, to Covenstead. And she's very wise, and she guides them. She helps them not to get into trouble, which is easy. It always has been easy in the occult world to go and find yourself in a very difficult position and find yourself in an abusive situation. Mm-hmm. So I'm very thankful Geraldine is still there and Atlantis is doing its job.
Yeah. And she's so generous and kind with her time and knowledge. She's very important. We've got some recordings in the museum of Alex's sort of trance work with Derek Taylor, psychic. And did you know what they were doing at that time or what that work was about? Because the trance tapes are very long and very intense, and you can't always hear what's happening. And we've been trying to decipher what was happening for some time.
Alex left London at the end of 1972. He came back a few times, so it was 73 before he'd really gone and established himself in Bexhill. But as he was leaving, and I was devastated, absolutely heartbroken, I said, why? And he said, well, I'm no longer of the craft. I now am going to do the great work. Well, it seems that the great work for a while was wonderful, abandoned sex.
Right.
Gay sex, lovely.
Yeah.
To be honest, the most of the work that was done in Bexhill, I think it was him paying for his dinner. Paying for his supper and breakfast too. And I think it deteriorated. I think his work was done and he just came to the end of it, and he got used to being the king of the witches and he liked it. He liked it, but he did pay for his supper that way. And Derek Taylor, he eventually, after Alex died, he set up all sorts of things to do with aliens and the like, and eventually went to do a sea ritual and was drowned. And I have to say there was an almighty cry of delight from the witches, because he was a vicious, cruel man who was violent with Alex, very violent. And Alex, well, Derek would never accept that he was dying. The witches around him wouldn't accept that he was dying. And they should be ashamed of themselves. But he came back to London because he knew I was always the one that got him out of trouble.
Right.
If there was a bad press report, he'd bring me up and say, Maxine, get in touch with the press council. And I'd do it all. And then I'd ring him in the afternoon and somebody would answer the phone and say, oh, he's in the pub. And I think, well, you weren't that concerned.
So, can you tell me, moving forward a bit now, can you tell me about the Temple of Mother and of the Mother and how and why you set that up and how it worked?
It wasn't a deliberate or conscious act. When Alex left, most of the witches abided by the rules. And the rules are, if you're going to separate, those who will go with him, go. So approximately half the coven went with Alex and didn't come to my coven. It was just a continuation. I was, as I say, devastated, and I had a lovely priesthood around me then, and they cared and they carried on, and one of them, Rusty in particular, took over the training, and it evolved. It wasn't the Temple of the Mother, it was only a Temple of the Mother, say, a year later. And it was, I think, one of the most intensive groups, covens, ever. There wasn't a day without the work happening, circles, hermetics, study, angelic work, healing. Every Wednesday was a healing night, and the queue would be, it was a queue down the steps to the basement, and they'd all have to go and sit in the hall, and we did get a write-up in the Lancet, because we were very strict. We always had our witches, we had several doctors, and they were always present. So the younger priests and priestesses that were learning the art of healing, it's easy to make a mistake.
Yes.
And we were really tough on, we wanted the best. If you wanted to be a healer, you had to be good at it. And we didn't want to make any mistakes. These patients that come to see you, and they come to a healer when the doctors have said they can't do any more.
Right.
And so the witch healer will comfort and heal. And sometimes that healing is just enabling the person to approach death in the most painless way possible. So, yes, we gathered quite a reputation for ritual. Even Alex loved it. You know, he would come up because I'm afraid the ritual down at Betshill wasn't that good. They thought it was, but it wasn't. And of course, Alex loved, he was a ritualist at heart. And what we had done, we had knocked out all the rubbish.
Right. Okay.
The empty ritual. There's nothing worse than empty ritual. There's nothing worse than sanctimosity without the holy.
And is that still continuing?
No. Everything has its heyday, including magical groups. You can't keep that amount of... I think it went from 73 till nearly 1980, and that was a good few years of absolute intense working, magical working. It wasn't just, oh, we'll meet on a Saturday. It was Saturday, and then there'd be the open ritual on the Sunday, and then on the Monday it'd be something else. But it was absolutely intense, and people were calling all hours of the day and night, whether it was the sick, people wanting magic, whether it was a suicide that you'd have to get up and let them in, you know, make them make a cup of tea, of course. I'm not going to get up for anybody without a cup of tea. And also good psychology there. If they were capable of making the tea, there was a strong possibility they weren't going to commit suicide. So the work, we didn't just work out of self-interest. We were there as, I don't want to call it a service, but we were there as a priesthood, and we worked as a priesthood, and we helped people.
So, thinking over the years, you must have met so many magical people. Apart from Alex, who's touched you the most, do you think?
Well, that's a difficult one. It's real magical people. There's some of them, they're wicked, they're evil, but they are magic. And the percentage in all those that I've met and worked with is about 10% that have that magical core that can turn in a moment into a magical movement and cause an effect. So who was most magical? I don't know. To be honest with you, I couldn't tell you.
No.
Everybody's an individual, and one has to respect another person, whether they're magical or not.
Yeah.
And when you're a teacher, you don't know whether that person is, the magic can be awakened within them or not. That's up to them. But when it has happened, it's been a joy. Not out of anything holy, just that they have that ability to shift their consciousness very quickly and effectively.
And in terms of writers, is there anyone who's
I'm not.
stayed with you?
I love books, but I dip in. But my favourite occult is The Unfortunate.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think when you read Sea Priestess, it gives you the atmosphere of what working magic is about.
Absolutely. There's that passage where the driftwood's gathered, and when it's lit, the different colours that it... And I tried that once. It was truly magical, that moment. Have you ever wished that you didn't have the responsibilities that you have being the person you are.
I've got responsibilities.
Yes, to an extent.
I don't think so.
No?
No.
Do you not see them? Well, that's good, I suppose, if you don't see them as responsible.
I mean, some people will say, and they're doing this more than ever. I mean, they come up and say, oh, you're the head. And I say, no, I'm not. No, I work with my coven, and I hope I work well. And I wish everybody else, from their covens, when the Grand Sabbats happen, that's lovely when the covens come together. And we're holding one soon in Portugal, and it's been the work of the Grand Sabbat where the different covens come together. This time it's for healing.
Right.
And, there are so many rifts and nasty political situations in the craft. I think it's time that they started to look at themselves and their craft. We all have to. And say, well, let's heal this. And then go away back to our own circles, work our own magic, and let there be peace, a nice peace, a supportive peace, rather than this joy, absolute joy of viciousness.
Yeah.
I think the craft has to start taking, generally, more responsibility for the Mother Earth.
Yes, absolutely.
We're constantly going on about, we work with Mother Nature, we work with the cycles. Well, put your money where your mouth is, gets work.
I mean, even on the level of the amount of sacred sites I've visited, and there's stuff left after people have performed rituals that...
That's what we did in the Temple of the Mother. We'd go to all these sites with our bags of plastic bags for the rubbish, and we'd clear them. We cleared streams, rivers, planted. We were always planting wherever we worked. Glastonbury being one of the places, Alderley Edge another regular place. Glastonbury was difficult. It sort of closed its doors to us, and we ended up working on a crossroads, and so the police couldn't come and interfere. That law still stands, but they were on the edge of, in the background. Massive. It was a Grand Sabbat, and but they came afterwards. To question us. Yeah, we have.
Are there any other run-ins with the police while rituals are being performed?
When we lived in Selmerston, we used to work on the Wilmington Man, and it was very Kabbalistic. Alex enjoyed Kabbalah and bringing it to life. And we were all up on the man, and suddenly there are these spotlights, a bit like in America where they're looking for the Joker or something, and you see it, and they're speaking through their trumpet saying, "Come down, come down, get off." Anyway, we all trooped down, quaking in our boots, our nakedness, and the policeman, he was going through every person saying, "And what's your name?" And he came to one of the witches and, "What is your name?" And said, "My name is Robin Arbuthnot." And the policeman said, "Oh, go on, pull the other one." Robin said, "I shall be pulling things and you will be notified in the morning." Well, he was quite important. And he got in touch with the Sussex police, and the police apologised. Good. And we had permission to work there whenever we want, as long as we notify them first.
Right.
I had lots of dealings with the police. When years ago they would come, if there'd been a murder or something and they couldn't find the body. We had one particular case where it was a child, and that was probably their most horrendous work. They knew the vicinity, but they didn't know where, so we did the work. And the child had been put in one of these storm drains and things. And that was horrible, horrible. And then to be, the next day to say to the police, "Well, we think we know where the child is." But they would approach us. They would approach us to do, discovery work rather than. We didn't solve cases or anything. They would tell us specifically what they wanted to know.
It's funny though, because cunning folk, the wise woman, would often be asked to find things. It's sort of almost like a traditional thing for wise people to practice, the finding of lost objects or stolen property or Or not usually?
Well, I don't. Personally, I wouldn't. You know, if you've lost your pen, you've lost your pen. It's got to be something really important before I'd even. And you need a group that is. They're in tune with each other, and they've done all the practices. You know, of getting out of the body. This, you know, having the safeguard in the circle so as you can bring them back. Yeah. That takes intense trusting and a terrific amount of patience and kindness to one another, because it's hard work. Hard work in the way that you're loving the work. It's interesting, and you never know, you know, what the outcome's going to be. And it's dangerous. You know, you get some people that they have. One of our witches, Andrew, he was a computer man, and in those days there were great big computers, you walked through them. He took an axe to it, had a nervous breakdown. You know, brilliant mind, thought he could cope with the amount of magic and work. Some people work too hard at it. And they're not all made for it.
And finally, I think, how do you see the future of the craft evolving? Have you any thoughts on that?
No, none whatsoever. The craft will look after itself. As is always said, the magic will have its way. The craft is, even if it changes and everybody becomes a Mars watcher or whatever, and you know, Christianity is gone and it will be said that witchcraft is gone. No, I think witchcraft even now is becoming more open and yet more closed. There are groups there that you don't know about, and they work. They work just as hard as we did in the Temple of the Mother, and they're having their heyday. But to keep the magic sacred, you have to keep it secret.
Yeah, I agree. Maxine, thank you so much.
It's a pleasure. Oh, and do carry on being the heartbeat of the craft.
We will do, promise. And thanks for coming down.